workshops or have come to office hours or things like this. We're just very interested to hear like what people are working on and if it's inspired anyone to sort of take up a project of their own. So yeah, if you have an opportunity to kind of respond to that, I definitely encourage you to do so. We'd be really interested to hear.
Okay, and I want to just say we already Facebook Live and recording, so whenever you're ready, we can start.
Okay, great, awesome. Okay, cool. So let me first quickly go ahead and start sharing my screen. And I think I have all the things that I want open to be open. Okay, great. So typically, well, first of all, I'll introduce myself again for anyone that's new or anyone that's joining for the first time. My name is Paige Swanson. I'm a full stack web developer. Professionally, I've been working for about 3.5 years now or so, roughly thereabouts. I've been working with the library for about a year now. Yeah, almost a year now. And we do a series, a Zoom series of workshops where we're learning how to code together, and hopefully I can share some of the things that I know about coding, so that you can maybe start projects of your own, and learn about developing software. So this series in particular, we're learning about building applications, like mobile applications. We're using a platform called NativeScript, which will help us build applications using web technologies. So if you want to follow along with some of my notes, and let me just go ahead and get those updated. Whoops, really quick. So I have them on my computer, and what I do is I have a Git profile, a GitHub profile, which everyone can access online, and that is where I host all of the content for the series. So if you want to be able to go back and kind of follow along with some of the things that we've already done previously, you can do so by just taking a look at the notes section, which I'll show in a second here. So just make that update and go ahead and send that out. Okay, great. So now I'm a co-host. Okay, so let me share my screen. You can see the notes that I'm talking about here. Should just be able to show the desktop. Great. Okay. So documentation. Go ahead and close out of that. Okay. So this is the URL for the notes. So if you just go to this URL, I'll go ahead and paste it actually in the chat. In case.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And I just want to say, if you guys have any questions, I'm gonna try to keep an eye on the chat all the time, and then answer the questions as they come. So feel free to ask anything. And welcome again.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah, and we'll try to also respond to the Q&A. So if you want to ask questions there too. Okay, great. So this is the homepage for the like workshop series. You can see here anyone new. I have my contact. So if you want to email me and ask me any questions, you can do so at any time. I'll try to get back to you. And we have office hours sign up. If you click this link, you can sign up for blocks, and you can talk to me during my office hours. That's every Monday, from 6:30 to 8:30. So feel free to sign up there. Any question at all, I'm always happy and interested to help with any kind of like code. If you hop over to the table of contents folder, you'll see all the session notes for each week. This week's is session 6, so March 23rd. And you can see here, it'll kind of pull up the notes. And this is sort of what we're working with, and kind of what we'll be walking through today. So today, we're going to kind of resume some of the stuff we introduced last week. But it's totally okay if you don't have the context. I'll try to make it as beginner friendly as possible, but I of course encourage you to go back, maybe check out the notes from last week if you kind of want to catch up, or you find yourself maybe a little bit confused. But feel free to stop me and ask questions, and I can always elaborate, and happy to do so at the end too. So to start today's session, I want to indicate this like kind of interesting resource that will come up again later as we proceed, but I wanted to address it now. It's this really neat site, which basically contains what are called a reference for HTML entities. So entities. So when you write HTML code, what you're doing is you're adding text to a document, an HTML document. And the document is using special symbols and characters to like you basically display your content. So one way we can actually take a look at HTML on a page is to inspect. So I did this by right-clicking in the browser. I can do this on any page. I can click inspect, and it should pull up a window that looks a lot like this. And just to give you an example, of some HTML, in case you're not familiar, this is what HTML looks like. HTML code looks like this. We can see a little bit more of a detailed view, I think, by well, this isn't the best, but this is okay. This isn't the best looking view of HTML, but this is more of like a code view. So this is like what the code would look like for this page. You can see that on any web page. You can see the code that was used to make the page happen. But this is a nicer view. It lets you kind of move around all the little different things that are happening on the page. So we can click around, click all these different things, and you'll see, if I scroll back down, you'll see all these things kind of get highlighted as it go. And that's because all these different pieces of HTML refer to different things on the page. And so specifically on this idea of these little entities, what these are is like pieces of text, but they have a special character indication. And we'll see how that comes up a little bit later, but it's going to let us use, special characters, kind of like emojis. And in fact, you can use emojis, I believe, in HTML. Some of them, a subset of emojis, but we can use all kinds of like special characters in our HTML when we want to make icons for our application. So if you're ever looking for icons or things like this to put on your web page, or to use in an app setting like this, definitely check out this kind of like reference because it's going to let you quickly view a lot of different icons, and you can see how to use them. Okay. So let's move on, and I wanted to introduce this idea of using CSS, which means which stands for Cascading Style Sheets, with NativeScript, which is the platform that we're using to build mobile apps, which I've talked about in the previous sessions. So I'm going to close this tab. So there's a couple of different ways to use CSS, and I talk about why we would want to use CSS in the last session, but there's a couple of different ways to do that when you're using NativeScript. One of the caveats of using NativeScript to build mobile applications is that NativeScript doesn't really use HTML. HTML being the stuff I was just showing you, where we're basically laying out all of the content in the page. So again, you can see here, like if I click into all these little things, okay, like all of the content for the page here is laid out in very detailed terms. Here's the text itself that we're like looking for in our HTML. So there's the word "or" right there. That's just text. And it's inside this little grouping here. This one happens to be called LI. But this is how you use HTML to build like a web page. When we use NativeScript to build mobile applications, we can't use HTML. It looks a lot more like XML, which is just a different kind of format. But to show an example of this, this is what NativeScript code looks like. I just have a sample app here that I created last session. It's just a blank template, and I've actually made some modifications to it, but it looks a lot like very close to HTML. You can see here these kind of like little brackets that open and close, and you can see it's grouped So this is the beginning of the grid layout little section, and then that closes here. You can see, I'm just switching tabs, that if I inspect again and look at some of this HTML, it's very similar. It's actually taking a long time to load because I guess there's so many little items. But you can see like I have these little sections. Okay, it's the same thing. This is letting me like collapse them and open them. And then in each section, there's additional sections. And then in each of those, there's like the content. So this is the text. So it's very, very similar, except we can't do all of the same things we would normally do if we wanted to style or format or make the content on our page or our app look different. And we do that with CSS. So HTML is the content. In the native script case, it's not HTML, it's a special kind of code that looks like this. But in both cases, HTML or not, you use CSS to make styling changes or sort of color changes or theme changes. Maybe I want everything to have these like sort of blue shades here. If I actually inspect this in the web page example, so not in my sample app, but like on a web page, which also uses CSS. If I look over here, this is all CSS code, and it's what's making this look blue. We can actually find that color right here. So this is actually where that color's, well, this one's a little bit more complicated. They have a lot of different things going on, but you can see they're using different colors for different parts of the page. That's where that comes from. It comes from CSS. So if we want to do the same thing in our app, we do have to do things a little bit differently. Whoops, that's my copy of the notes. Go back to the notes here on the site. We have to do things a little bit differently. Usually the way we'd want to do that to make our lives easier is to use something like a simple framework or just generally a framework. So a framework is going to be a set of code that already exists that someone created to be shared and for us to use. So native script, what I've been talking about, which is what we're using to build apps, that's a framework. It's a framework of tools and pieces of code that already exist that other people created that are going to help us build our apps more quickly. So we don't have to write as much code. For instance, when I created this little template app, I just ran one command to do so. I ran this command. I introduced this command in the last session, but I can show it here. If I take a look at, scroll through some of my old commands here, you can see right here, I run this command, Tns Create, after I already installed native script. This command alone is going to put together a bunch of code that already exists that's going to run our app, and it's going to make things, it's going to make our app work successfully by using all of this code that's created by others and shared with us. And native script also provides a bunch of pieces of code that are accessible using like special keywords and other like kind of special components or pieces that we can use and reference to mean sort of different things. That sounds a little bit vague, but I'll try to explain more once we get our sample app running. So I just wanted to first, though, introduce this concept more clearly of a framework, and specifically a framework for CSS. So if native script is a framework for making apps and building apps quickly, then a CSS framework will let us write CSS or use CSS more quickly. So this is what I'm kind of getting at. There's a couple of options for using a CSS framework with native script. One option would be to find a typical CSS framework, one that's already out there, that already exists, and then to turn it into something we can use in native script. Most CSS is used for HTML. We already said that native script doesn't exactly use HTML. So one problem is the way that the CSS often interacts with HTML is by referring to HTML specific concepts. So if that isn't exactly very clear, I'll point out kind of an example. So I like this this website in particular. I wonder if I have a link to it here. Okay, I'll make sure to add a link to it. I like going to the Mozilla Developer Network, which is a common documentation site for stuff like CSS and HTML. So you see here, they have all these different options. If I click on CSS here, and I go down to like the basics section, which, yeah, but this would be a good example. Okay, so actually the first example on the CSS knowledge section is about referencing a piece of HTML to change its color. So in this case, the reference is to the letter P, which is a special HTML element. It's a paragraph element. So what this is saying is turn a paragraph the color red. Now, this code isn't applied on this page because we would see a red paragraph. But actually what I can do, sorry, I'm going all over the place. I didn't mean to do that. Okay. So what I can do, though, even though this doesn't appear to be in use on this page because we don't see a red paragraph, I can actually turn this paragraph red using some quick CSS just to show you how this would work. So what I can do here is add a rule. Oops. I think I have to do it in here. Yes. So I think this should work, maybe. Let's try it. So I'll add a rule here that looks exactly like this. So I'll say P color red. And I have no idea if this is going to work. It might not work at all. Yeah, I think I put it in the wrong place. Okay, it's fine. Oh, wait. Oops. Sorry, we have this rule right down here. Totally missed it. Okay, so you can see there's already a rule existing for paragraphs that's being applied to this paragraph in particular. And what this rule is doing is saying that the bottom margin of this paragraph, which is right here, this one, is 24 pixels, roughly. What I can do is actually modify this rule to show you how it's affecting this particular paragraph. So I can change it, right? And you can see it's increasing, the margin is increasing to add more white space here. So this is what's called an element specific selector. So I'm saying this specific element P, which you can see is right here, I'm saying that the margin at the bottom underneath this P element should be 33px. Okay, so I can't do that in native script. So for my native script code here, which is going to be shown in my app, and what I'll do actually is I have this saved because I think this would be a good example. So I'm just going to go ahead and take it out and we'll save it over here to the side in my text editor. And let's just add a couple of things I already sort of know about that I'll introduce in a second. I just want to get a very simple sort of template going on here so I can show just a basic part of the app so that you can get a better grasp of what's going on. And okay, the app is restarting. Okay, great. So I have this little, and we'll actually reference this style that I have down here, which we'll also explain in a second, so that it shows up in the center. Okay, great. So this looks nice. So this is a sample app that I've set up. I talked in previous sessions about how to get this set up on your computer. So if you're a little bit confused about how I got this sample app, you can go back and hopefully see how to get that set up for yourself. But this is code that I got simply by running the command I showed before after installing native scripts. So this Tns Create. It walks you through making a blank app template, and it generates all this code for you. And all I've done so far really is just edit this little section. This is inside of the folder app. components home.view. This is on the GitHub page, so you can go take a look at this code. Okay, so looking at this, what I have here is actually some code that says there should be some kind of layout. So where this text is going to appear in the frame, and then what should be inside of that layout. So a label, it has the text hi. And oops, the interesting thing here that I want to point out that relates to our CSS is there's this attribute. This is an attribute. It's a class. Okay, and the class is info. So this is totally made up. This doesn't come from anything in particular. This is just arbitrary piece of text that I wanted to create for myself. I could have called it anything. It could be like dog or something like that. But you'll see that. Ooh, need to get this out of the way. If I change it to dog, in the simulator, what happens is that this text no longer looks the way it did. And that's because certain CSS rules aren't being applied to it anymore. Well, we can go scroll down to the style section where we have in NativeScript all of our CSS it sort of lives in this style section for this particular view in our app. So in this style section, we have all of these CSS rules. Okay, this isn't a CSS rule necessarily. This is just helping us get some more tools to use with our CSS. But these are CSS rules right here. They should look similar to you from this example that I showed from this page. But you'll notice that the selector looks a little bit different. Okay, so you see the letter P here. It's just the letter P. And in our CSS here, we don't have just a letter or some characters together, right? We have this dot. The reason for that, and you'll see this most commonly in NativeScript because it's a little bit easier to work with, is this is what's called a class selector. So what I'm doing is basically coming up with an arbitrary little like word, or it doesn't have to be a word. We'll make a new one below just to kind of demonstrate that. I'm coming up with an arbitrary like a property or name or something, a unique name. So this could be dog this time, okay? And can even have hyphens, dog that runs, something like that. Sorry to use very arbitrary text. And I can add my CSS rules here. Don't worry if you don't know all of these offhand. You sort of learn them over time. But one that we do know from just learning very quickly on this tutorial site is about coloring text. So we can just borrow this one really quick because we already recognize it. So how about we actually make something meaningful too, and we'll say text that is red. Okay, so this time we'll use the same label that we created, which is called a class. Okay, so because I have this dot specifier here, I'm saying this is a CSS rule for a class. I'm going to copy this label identifier that I made and paste it as the value for my class attribute on this label. This is kind of what I'm getting at when I talk about writing CSS for NativeScript. In NativeScript, we actually don't have something called a paragraph. We don't have a little p. This is specific to HTML. So we only have available to us these kinds of elements here, which come from the documentation on NativeScript view, which I've also talked a little bit about before, but just offhand, if you're coming in new, you can find all of these elements, all of the elements available to you in NativeScript are all listed right here. So you can see, for instance, the one that I'm referencing here, label, you can see it appear right here. We can click on it. we can see all the different options that we have for creating labels. So I'm giving this label a class. That's how I would say that. I said this label has the class text that is red, and then I wrote a CSS rule for it. I could also make a rule that looks like this. Label, okay? This now does refer to this label element, and in fact, all label elements. So I now have a CSS rule that will make all label elements red. And I guess I haven't really shown this in action. So this is the app actually live updating whenever I make a change on my computer to the code. So you can see all labels are now red. There's multiple labels in our app view. I'm now making all of them red because of my CSS rule. Classes let me basically define groups of rules that I can then make very specific or very generic. And they give us a lot of flexibility. And they're useful to use in native script because there's a lot of CSS already out there that targets classes because they are kind of arbitrary, because I can make whatever class I want. I tend to find it much more useful to use classes when I write native script code because I could also see myself using those same CSS rules or same CSS code for my HTML. So I'm going to use classes here, and you'll kind of see those examples like going forward. And actually, the sample code that they give you uses classes as well. So that's kind of helpful. This is another CSS file. So in this case, the CSS in this components folder is all contained in this style section. Over here, though, the CSS is in a separate file. So that's the distinction between these two, but it's still CSS. So not to be confusing, but I just wanted to show that. But we're going to stay in this file, the home.view file, because that's controlling how this looks. So I've made this class text that is red. Okay, I've gotten rid of the rule that affects all labels. And what we should see eventually is that this will update. Sometimes it takes a second to do the update, but that's okay. We won't worry about it. This is just going to update in the background. So when it gets important for it to update, we'll make sure it does so. So I have the CSS rule. I showed you how it kind of allows us to select elements that we defined here with CSS using selectors like this. So that's really the only one I'm going to talk about is the class selector and the element selector, which I already introduced to you, but that we're not really going to use. So what does that have to do with frameworks for talking about a CSS framework? Well, you might want to use a CSS framework where you don't want to write out a CSS rule and make a CSS class for every single style or like appearance change or update that you want to make in your app. This would be a very tedious experience, or a very, actually, that's referring to this little note right here. So basically building our own CSS rule set. So for every style that we want to see, so for every color in our app, for every font change, these would all be things you do with CSS or with CSS. Having to write out each one of those rules individually would take a very long time. And it would not necessarily be something that you'd want to do unless you really didn't have that much going on in your app. Another option would be to find an existing CSS framework and then adapt it to use in native script. This also takes a long time because, like I was mentioning before, CSS is typically used with HTML. And so most CSS that you'll come across is written for HTML, or it's written with HTML in mind. This is a problem because of what I mentioned. If I have a reference to an element that isn't in native script, the CSS won't work. It won't do anything. So, downloading a bunch of CSS code that's already out there and trying to make it work for your app may take a very long time. It may be a very tedious experience. Okay, so what's your kind of last option, or a faster option? And it's not your only option, but it's certainly, I think, a pretty good option. The NativeScript developers built this really cool tool. It's called the NativeScript Theme Builder. What this lets you do is it's going to generate for you a file that contains a bunch of CSS rules. The rules are generated using this online tool. So it will automatically generate rules based on settings and selections we've made using this tool. So I'll do a quick sort of demo of it. I won't change very much about this, but I'll make enough changes so you can see the difference in our app, which still hasn't updated. Maybe I can get it to update really quick, because that's going to bother me. And usually I just have to save a change. So we'll just update this label to be something different. Okay, so it's thinking in the background right now. So we'll see if an update is in fact made. Okay, so back to our theme builder. So the workflow for doing this is pretty simple. You basically click around on this page, going through the different sections. You look at things you might want to include in your app: headings, shaded text, or highlighted text, or different color text, different sort of styles of text, buttons and sliders and things like this. All these different flavors of buttons, headers and things. And you make decisions following their guide. You can also select Android, by the way, if you have an Android phone. You can look and see the different Android sort of styles, but you'll see they look pretty much similar across the board, which is good because we might want to develop for both Android and iOS. You can kind of walk through this, and you'll see that with each change you make, it will update the look here. So let's go to buttons. Okay, and we can change the color of like the this text, for example, for this plain button. So this is supposed to be a plain button that you can press here, but I can change the text of it here. Oh, maybe I didn't do it in the right place. Let's see. Oh, this is primary, but oh wait, no, it did work. Okay, yeah, just took a second to update. So you can see I changed this button text to blue. So what this will do in the downloaded file is create a CSS rule that says that button text should be blue. So this is, again, hopefully clear that this is a really useful function, because it makes our process for building our app a little bit easier and a little bit more hands-on. So we can kind of go through here and make the changes that we want to make our selections, and then download the result, which provides us with a bunch of CSS rules just ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and download this theme because I kind of like the way this looks. I'm going to click download, and it also shows us how to use the theme on top of our like in our app itself. So I'm going to show you how to, like, where to include these items, but it actually details this too. So you can see here, it tells you to include this core theme first, and then make sure that you start using the classes that it's going to provide for you in the CSS code that you download. Okay, so we're going to download the CSS file. Okay, I'm going to click save. Okay, and I'm just going to quickly review these instructions again. So it says, we want to set the default CSS file, and we want to include this inside of the main CSS code file, the CSS code for our whole app. So to clarify again where that is, so this file is for a specific view in our app. It's specifically to show, oh, and it still didn't update. That's frustrating. Let me go ahead and close out. Oops. So I'm going to cancel the process by saying Control C. And I'm going to try to just get it to run again. This is the command I'm using, tns run iOS and then emulator. So hopefully this will refresh it in the background while we focus on some other stuff. So again, this is for this particular view, showing home and the word hi. And here's the style for that, okay? And then here is the main application CSS. So this is loaded as soon as the app opens. And all of your components, like this particular view, will actually inherit or apply the CSS that is set up in here. So we actually are using a theme already. It's kind of like a CSS sort of framework. We're using a theme called Blue, but we don't really want that. We want to use, and look, we're already actually including core. But I think we can go ahead and try to include it again. Let's see if we can get away with not including it. Let's see what happens. Okay, so what this is saying is it's wanting us to import our downloaded theme. And the way we do that is actually reference the directory where we completed our download. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open a folder. Okay, whoops. My computer's being a little bit sluggish. Let's see if we can get a date modified. Okay, great. This is our custom CSS. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this into folder. We can just put it into the app folder, I think. Okay, let's put it in there. So I dropped it in there in my text editor. So you can see it appeared. Okay, and let's take a look inside. We can see all of these little CSS rules, and notice they're all class selectors. So dot and then the class that we're creating here. This is like a special way of saying that when this switch is turned on or off, this would be for like a you would apply this to like a switch element or a little element that has a control in your page. This is saying that the background color should change when the switch is enabled, and that the color should change when the switch is enabled. But you can see we have all these different rules available to us, and they're all class-based rules, and they were all auto-generated just by basically filling out the form provided here. So this is super helpful, super useful. Oh, and it looks like it worked. So that's good. At least it seems to have. So great. So this is up to date now. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. So hopefully you were able to check that out. I'm not sure we'll get to layout in space, but I think we can. So we'll just kind of keep going along there. But hopefully let's see if we can get our, oh, that's right. We were trying to incorporate this custom CSS. So we dropped it into the app folder. Again, this is next to the components folder. If I open my documents, I can kind of show you where this is. So if this is the template app that you created, if you're going back and you're able to kind of walk through the process of doing this yourself, you'll see that there's an app folder here. There's a components folder, which we were in looking at our home.view file. And then there's this custom CSS that I just added. So that's where I ended up putting it. And now in app CSS, what I should be able to say is, should actually just be able to say custom.css. If I save that, let's see what happens. This will yell at us if it can't find it. Oh, it worked. Great. It looks not quite like what I expect. I think we do need the light theme, actually. So maybe when I referenced that instruction that it gave me, I think I didn't listen. And it wants me to grab the light theme in particular. So how do I do that? Okay, import custom CSS. So let's see if we click about maybe. Let's see. Or I think I just click download again. Okay, great. Yeah, so it gives me these instructions. Native script provided core theme. So I need to be using the light theme in particular. Let's see if we can read about using the light theme. Okay. So if I do this, I'm going to take a guess. Maybe I can search the word light. Not exactly the experience I was hoping for. Okay, I'm going to do like a little bit of a hack and just guess. But I was hoping that it would work just using the core theme. So I was looking at this example below, where it's a compatibility, and comparing it with their recommendation to do the word light here. I'm hoping maybe just saying light. This might do it for us. I'm not sure though. Oh yeah, it doesn't like it. Okay, maybe if I hyphen, I'm not sure. Yeah, it doesn't like it. Okay. I had this working as a demo, but I deleted it and reinstalled. So that's kind of disappointing. But maybe hold on. You know what it also said? It also said here that you need to make sure we actually need to use the classes that are provided. So like for example here, the elements that you're using need to have the classes that are referenced in your rules. So maybe that's all we need to do, and that's what I'm misremembering. Hopefully it's very clear to everyone, by the way, that all of this, this whole process of building an app and things like this, it's always going to be trial and error. But hopefully you're encouraged to try things out and find sort of solutions if you get stuck. But of course, again, that's why I have office hours available. If you have questions or run into problems like this, but you can't figure out the solution, you're always, welcome and encouraged to come by and try to work out your issues there. Okay, so what I suggested is maybe the reason the action bar doesn't look the way we wanted it to, the way it was in our theme, is because we're not using the action bar class that we included in our custom CSS. So let's see if we have a class. And it looks like we do. So we have a class now for action bar. And it looks like we have a couple rules that will affect it. So let's go ahead and include that in our template section. So to do that, we'll say class, and we'll paste that in. We'll say action bar. And what we should see is that this should update, hopefully, in a second. I'm hoping. Another problem I've had is that this tends to be a little bit slow, and it doesn't respond as quickly as I'd like. Oh, Webpack build done, maybe? Might still be thinking, but I'm not super confident. I'm a little disappointed. It did find my custom CSS though. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not very pleased with that. Okay, but I won't dwell on it. And maybe it's something I'll figure out and try to update in the next session, because I did have it working, and I wonder if it's just because this isn't updating in the background, unfortunately. So we're not getting our changes. But in any event, let's try to move on to layouts. So even if you can't get, something like a framework working in this case, we still always have our CSS located here. And let's actually see if that still works. So we could, of course, add the CSS rules provided by this downloaded theme. We could add them manually to our particular component. So I'll copy and paste them in just like this in our style section. And we still have our class referenced here. And yeah, it did come in successfully. So for some reason, I'm just not getting the styles from this file to come into my app. And I'm not sure why that is. But okay, we got some of the styles working because we were able to copy paste them into our style section here. So what I wanted to talk about next beyond, so taking a big group of CSS rules and using it to build a kind of like a theme for your application. What I wanted to talk about next is layout and space in an application. So right now in our app, in our sample, we don't have, oh, and I'm going to go ahead and update this actually. Well, no, I'll actually update it as I kind of describe layouts. So let me hop back to the sort of guide here. So layout and space, on layout and space. So when we're laying out an application, ideally, we think in our head about all the different elements that we have, or want to have in a view of our application, and we think about where they're going to go. So, maybe, for example, I'd prefer probably that this text here was in the center of the app, and maybe I'd have like a button over here, or a tab, something like this. This would describe our layout. So where things are in our app. In NativeScript, the way to create layouts, you use a special type of element, which sort of handles the positioning of everything, of all of your content, as well as the content itself. So it's where you're going to put the content, and it's how the content is going to be presented. So to get to this stuff, if we go back to the NativeScript view docs page, which I've been kind of clicking around on, as you notice, and I'm going to close these things up. So it's this page here. You get there by going to nativescriptview.org and then clicking docs. I have it bookmarked actually. If we scroll down and we go to this elements layouts section, you can see there's a variety of different layouts available. I'm going to talk briefly about the three most kind of common, or the ones that you'd probably find yourself using the most if you're starting to build an app. The first one, oops, sorry, going back to the sort of guide here. Each section under this little elements layouts thing here describes a different type of layout. So this is like a wrap layout. So each section describes a different approach. But the most typical are going to be grid, stack, and absolute. Those are probably the ones that you would want to use most frequently because they describe pretty basic, simple layouts. So the grid layout, that's going to let you create columns and rows, that kind of structure, which are going to fill the frame of your screen if you want them to. And the grid layout, I believe, is really probably the most common form of layout. There's a bit of a description here, which I think is pretty helpful that you can read through. And it kind of describes the approach that you're going for when you do this grid layout. So a grid layout with fixed sizing would look like this. And fixed sizing means basically that the size of the grid itself, this is the grid, you're specifying it using this little attribute here, this columns attribute. So let's kind of do an example of that in our code to kind of see what that would look like. So we're going to add these columns. They're this size, so 115 by 115. This is just an arbitrary unit of measurement that NativeScript uses in particular. So it's saying 115 units, so to speak. We'll kind of see how that plays out when we load this up. And we'll say rows, the same thing. Paste that in. We'll see if this is loading. So you'll see the text actually did move around a little bit, but we still haven't finished our job, which is to basically say where in the grid this element should go. This element is part of the grid because we put it inside of these grid layout tags. So this is the opening tag, what's called, and this is the closing tag. And label is inside of that, which means it's part of the grid. Okay. So, okay, let's see. So, okay, sorry. So this grid layout is organized in rows and columns. So the way this is going to work is like this is a row and these are columns. So this would be column 0 actually. So it starts at the number 0 and it's showing you here row column. So this is row 0 and column 1. So 0, 1. Okay, so we're going to try to do something similar with our label. We're going to put it into column 0, row 1. Okay, so row column, right? Okay. So if we take a look now, it's shifted around a little bit. It's still butting up against the left side of the screen, but that's something we can kind of fix with CSS. And it does this because text by default will align with, like, it'll align to the left, like how English text on a page starts from, from left to right. This is just a default behavior. We can actually, we can change that with some quick CSS. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this stuff. We can actually use our class here. We'll say grid text. And we'll make a new class and we'll reference it here with our class attribute. And what we'll say is that I happen to know a rule offhand. Actually, we have one right here set up for this purpose. So it's going to horizontally align the text center, and it's going to vertically align the text center. It's also going to update the font size. So let's just use that rule. We don't need to make a new one. And we'll reference the class here by saying info. So we're saying info on this label because we have a rule for info right here. And if we save it, and if I open up my simulator, you'll see that that is now present. Now, it's still not clear the way our grid looks. And the reason is I didn't include these background colors. Let's try to do that so we can see exactly how much space this label takes up. So I'll say that here, just like they did in their example. We'll be able to see, okay, how much space this label is actually taking up. So it might be smaller than you thought it would be. And the reason is because this screen is a different size than our grid. So basically, it may not be helpful for us to use what are called absolute units. So describe the size of the grid without knowing the size of our screen. This is a concept that comes up a lot in CSS because you want to make web pages that load and look the same way no matter how they're being viewed. So whether they're being viewed on a phone or they're being viewed in the browser. So let's try a different way of defining our grid size. And that's described below. So this is called using star sizing, and it's called responsive design. So basically, the idea is that the grid will occupy the space no matter how large the screen or no matter what size the screen is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this background color actually because I don't really like this background color, but I will also add additional elements like they have in the example. Now let's go ahead and copy paste them. But I'm going to update them to be positioned where I expect my grid to kind of fill. So let's make the second one, we'll make it in column 1, but row 1. And then this one will be in column 1, or sorry, column 0, but row, whoops, what am I, oh, let's make this 0, 2. So this should also be in the same row. So this would be the first row, column 0 and 1, and this will be in the second row, which is referred to by the number 1 because it starts at 0. And this will be 0 and 1 again. Okay, so they all say the same thing. It's kind of silly, but you'll see because I defined my grid, and I think this kind of shows you this full size of the grid a little bit better. Because I defined my grid with these arbitrary units, like they're only going to fill up that much. They're not going to fill up the whole screen. So let's try now using star sizing and see how that changes our columns. So notice the columns can shift and they fill the whole width. And what this is doing is saying basically, we want 2 columns, one size star and the other size star. And really what that's saying is one sized by basically half and the other size by half. So they'll fill each other's missing width. You can also double the size of a column by just saying 2 star. This will make this column twice the size of the other one, which is just a single star. You can do the same thing with the rows to achieve a balanced effect with those two. Obviously, I've run out of time. Unfortunately, I was hoping we would get a little bit further with the layouts, but I think that's okay. I tried to describe some of the other layouts in the notes, and I encourage you to attempt to set up the template, the blank template for yourself, and play with the different layouts available. You can also check out this link, another tool from the native script developers. So similar to the theme builder, they also have a layout system, a layout scheme, where you can basically walk through, different layouts and test them out. So it has these different levels. You can kind of walk along and see different layouts in action. You know, it's wanting you actually to like participate and do different things. So in this case, it wants us to do a vertical orientation, and then it completes because you got it right. Then you can go on to the next one. But this is a fun way to kind of figure out whether you would like to use different layouts or not, because this is really going to inform how your app is built, how all of your data and your icons and your different controls are structured. But I still probably suggest using one of these 3 because it's just a lot easier. It's easier to work with, and it'll kind of get you to what you probably or most likely have in mind. So most apps are kind of laid out in this way. But the documentation really does do a good job of kind of showing you what these are going to look like and how to play with them. The stack layout's another example. It kind of gives you examples of like what this looks like. And then of course there's absolute layout, which I also mentioned is a really nice way of getting things really particular. And again, you'll see these arbitrary units come up a lot, these kind of like width and height. I think there is a way to know how tall a particular screen is. So if you were building like an app for a particular phone screen, you could try to do that. I'm not sure how to do that in native script, but I think using the documentation, you might be able to find that information. But if you can't, or you're interested in doing that, feel free again to come to my office hours. If you also want to try getting the theme set up, what I'll do is I'll make sure to get the custom theme working this week, and I'll upload that to the GitHub page so you can see an example of it. And to get to the sample code that I've been working with, just go here, counter app. And as long as you have native script set up, you should be able to use this counter app. So to close out the session, the reason I called this folder counter app is because I'm hoping that that's what we will do next, is we will start actually building a little counter app. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. Wanted to get back to the notes for today's session. So that's where I wanted to go next after we talked about layouts, is actually making a simple counter app. So this counter will have a decrement, an increment, a reset count, and the count itself. So basically lets you just, add to a number and subtract from a number. So maybe if you want to, I don't know, like around the house, count a bunch of little items that you have, like maybe you collect coins or something like this, it's not a super ambitious application, but I think it's a good starter. I know people often use these actually when playing board games. You have a small number. It's really not that large, but you need to remember it for a long time so you can keep track of that. So what we'll be doing is adding elements, kind of like what we were doing here in our sample code. So we were adding labels. So they would say hi right here. So next time what we'll be trying to do is basically adding all of these elements to our page. We'll be styling them, making them look a certain way, and making them have certain spacing and formatting and layout. And after that, what we'll do is we'll try to use JavaScript to make them function the way we want them to. So actually count a number and increment and decrement. Yeah, I think that's it for today. Yeah, really sorry that we couldn't get the theme working. Again, I'll get that working this week and get it uploaded. And if you have any questions about it, about adding your own CSS themes or your own CSS framework, feel free to reach out to me. Lastly, we have a survey that we sent out to participants in the series. We're really interested in hearing about apps maybe that people have been working on in their spare time or have just started, or just app ideas that you might be thinking about. So please, if you get a chance, fill out that survey. And I think that's it for today.
Yeah, Paige, will you mind to, this session was great. Will you mind to repeat your office hours, which is every Monday?
Yes. So my office hours are Monday, 6:30 to 8:30. In the chat, I will post a link, but again, if you got the GitHub link, which is in the chat right now, if you click that, if you go to the bottom, there's a link for office hours sign up. If you click that, it shows you my office hours every Monday. So which are in 2 hours, 2 hours total in 30-minute blocks. I don't think it'll block you from signing up for multiple blocks. If you want to do that, that's totally okay. It would not bother me. I would be happy to accept people for multiple blocks. So no problem there. And yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that was great. I love it. I'm gonna try to do it.
Yeah, great, awesome, cool. Well, thanks everyone, and I'll see you next time, and hopefully see you in office hours.
Okay.
All right, bye everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.